Did you know that Dudley never got trapped inside the snake exhibit at the zoo? And Harry got upgraded out of the cupboard under the stairs after the first letter from Hogwarts arrived, but not because Mr. and Mrs. Dursley were afraid of his magical powers. These are just a couple of changes out of over a dozen from these two scenes in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And these changes are fun details that you might have missed if you only watched the films but have never read the books. My name is Gibby and welcome back to Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter edition. This is the show where I analyze the originals versus the adaptations of your favorite fantasy franchises and put on my nerd hat and point out all of the small to large differences you never noticed between the two. Today, we're covering the next two scenes in the Philosopher's/Sorcerer's Stone movie, which covers Dudley's birthday, their time at the zoo, and the arrival of the letters from Hogwarts. As always, I'm going to cover the changes across 4 categories, which are characters, location, timeline, and plot. Plus, every once in a while, I'll throw in some extra information to help give you context to a scene or the wizarding world in general. Of course, before we get started with the changes, we need to refresh our memories on what these two scenes are all about. So let's pick up where we left off in last episode, with Harry waking up in the cupboard under the stairs on Dudley's birthday. Dudley comes bounding down the stairs and slams Harry back into his cupboard, and then Harry makes his way into the kitchen. We quickly realize that this is a Cinderella story, as Harry is instructed to cook the food for the family without burning anything, while Dudley gets shown to his 36 presents. Dudley throws a fit since last year he says he received 37 presents, and so his parents agree to buy him 2 more to make up for their egregious mistake. We then cut to the family getting into the car to head to the zoo, and Vernon Dursley takes Harry aside and warns him that if there is any funny business, he won't have meals for a week. They get to the zoo, and Dudley is unimpressed with a large snake that is sleeping in its exhibit. But after Dudley walks off, Harry talks to the snake and apologizes for everyone's behavior. To his surprise, the snake seems to understand him and is reacting to his comments, and Dudley sees the snake finally moving and showing some sign of life, so he shoves Harry out of the way to take a look. Obviously upset by this, Harry accidentally makes the glass to the exhibit disappear, and Dudley falls in while the snake escapes. The snake thanks Harry, and then as Mr. and Mrs. Dursley approach, they realize that the glass to the exhibit has reappeared and Dudley is now trapped inside. The scene then cuts to them at home, and Vernon takes Harry by the head, and although Harry insists he doesn't know what happens and that it was like magic, Vernon says there is no such thing as magic, and then slams him inside of his cupboard. We then flash to an owl delivering a letter to the house and Harry picking up the mail. He sees that a letter is addressed to him, but Dudley points him out and Vernon takes the letter. Realizing who it's from, Petunia and Vernon begin to panic as more and more letters arrive for Harry. The climax of these letters is when the family's sitting in the living room on a Sunday, and suddenly hundreds of letters come spewing out of the fireplace. This prompts Mr. Dursley to take action and take the whole family away from the house, thinking that he can outrun his problem. We then finish up with Harry counting down the minutes until his birthday, while the family is on an island in the middle of the sea during a raging storm. And right after the clock strikes midnight, a loud bang is heard outside the front door. And that is where we cut off for this week's scenes. I know, I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger, but trust me, there's plenty to cover in just these 2 scenes in the movie, and next week we'll get to Hagrid's arrival. So let's kick things off with our first category of character changes. And just like last week, we have quite a few. Speaking of last episode, if you have yet to watch it, be sure to go check it out so that you're all caught up with where we are today. To start, the characters we see in these scenes are Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley Dursley. And then of course, Harry Potter. In the book version of events, there aren't many extra characters we see, but quite a few are named. First, there's Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss. Then we have Mrs. Figg, who we'll get more into during the plot changes, and Aunt Marge, who we actually get to meet in The Prisoner of Azkaban. We also have Dudley's gang of friends, who aren't named specifically but go around chasing Harry, and lastly, the zookeeper at the snake exhibit. Plus, we have some character changes in regards to appearance. First, Dudley and Mrs. Dursley are both blonde in the books, and that is quite opposite to the movies. Second, Harry in the books has distinct green eyes after his mother Lily. But in the movie, Daniel Radcliffe has blue eyes. This is because originally Daniel was going to wear contact lenses, but he ended up being allergic to them, therefore causing them to rewrite Harry's eyes as Dan's natural blue. Next, onto the location changes, there's only one. Quite simply, they stay at a random hotel on the way to the house in the sea, and this plays into a small plot change as well, so I'll save the context of this moment for later in the plot category. As for timeline differences, we have a couple of deviations. First, in the book, Vernon threatens to lock Harry in his cupboard until Christmas if he misbehaves at the zoo, but in the movie, he says Harry won't have meals for a week. Second, after the zoo incident, Harry narrates that he has his longest punishment ever, and wasn't allowed out of the cupboard until summer holiday. We then get some narration about the summer before we get to the start of the next school year. In the movie, we seem to cut directly from the zoo day to when Harry's first letter arrives. Of course, we can assume that the summer moments still happened, but the movie just decided not to cover them. Finally, we come to everybody's favorite category of plot changes. Today we have quite a few, as well as some bits of context that I'll sprinkle in throughout to help you better understand what you missed if you've only watched the movies. But before we dive in, I just want to remind you that you can grab your free copy of The Sorcerer's Stone or any other audiobook you desire by using my link in the description to get a free trial on Audible. There's absolutely no purchase necessary, and you support the channel at the same time. Follow along with me as I do this series and listen to the audiobook each week as we go chapter by chapter, revealing every difference between the books and the movies. Okay, so let's get back to the plot changes. Let's start right at the beginning of these scenes and jump into the very first change, which has to do with Dudley's gifts. It's a small one, but I'm obligated to point out every detail in these videos. Dudley in the books actually received 38 presents the year before, not 37. In the book, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley get Dudley 36 gifts, and he also gets one from Aunt Marge. Next, before heading to the zoo, Mrs. Dursley gets off a phone call and informs Mr. Dursley that Mrs. Figg, the neighbor, won't be able to watch Harry today. We then get more context as to who Mrs. Figg is. Harry notes that he never enjoys going to her house as she just shows him pictures of her many cats, and he is ecstatic that for the first time in his life, he might actually get to join in on the birthday festivities and go to the zoo for the first time. Later in the series, we learn more about the real identity of Mrs. Figg, but we'll get there in a couple years. Next, after Dudley fake cries about Harry joining the trip, his friend Piers Polkiss arrives, and we learn that Piers is typically the boy who holds kids' arms behind their backs while Dudley punches them. Our next change happens during the drive to the zoo, which is omitted from the films entirely, and Vernon mentions that people who ride motorcycles are hooligans. Harry says that he just had a dream about a flying motorcycle the night before, and this nearly causes Vernon to wreck the car as he says there's no such thing as flying motorcycles. And this is the first of many times that dreams Harry has either reference a memory of his or he sees other strange things. Before we move on to the rest of the differences, I wanted to give some context to Harry's magical incidents before the one at the zoo. Vernon actually kind of has a reason for threatening Harry, as Harry had had many magical moments throughout his life. First, Harry recalls a time when he had received a bad haircut from Aunt Petunia, and he was afraid to go to school the next day. But to his surprise, he woke up the next morning and the hair had grown back completely overnight. Another time, Petunia was trying to get Harry to wear an ugly sweater, and the sweater began to quickly shrink as she forced it over Harry's head. By the end of it shrinking, it was only big enough for a hand puppet, and Aunt Petunia chalked it up to shrinking in the dryer. Lastly, there was a time when Harry was running from Dudley's gang at school, and after diving behind a trash can, he found himself on the top of the school. Obviously, he had apparated there by mistake, but this landed him in loads of trouble. So when Mr. Dursley warned him about any funny business at the zoo, it wasn't really without cause, as the Dursleys had witnessed quite a few strange things happen throughout Harry's life. So now on to the changes at the zoo. First, Piers Polkiss is actually the one who calls out for Dudley and his parents to see what the snake is doing after Harry gets it to start moving. Next, after the snake escapes, it actually says, "Brazil, here I come, thanks amigo." Plus, although Dudley does fall into the enclosure, the glass does not reappear like in the movie. The zookeeper walks up and asks, "Where did the glass go?" And then we hear how the director of the zoo treats them to tea and profusely apologizes for the incident. And then this is when we have the summer scenes from the book that get skipped over in the movie. Harry references Dudley's gang, who spend their days chasing him around, and he also mentions another dream he has had of a bright green flash of light, which we know is about the night he defeated Voldemort. Also, for some context, we begin to hear how Dudley has been accepted to Vernon's old boarding school, Smeltings, but Harry is stuck going to public school. Mrs. Dursley even takes some of Dudley's old school clothes and dyes them gray for Harry to wear, while Harry watches Dudley march around in his brand new school uniform. This gives some context as to the timeline of why Harry's letters arrive at the time they do, as J.K. Rowling is making sure that we're aware the school year is approaching. We also learn about some of Harry's odd encounters throughout his life, as he mentions that his whole life, people in strange clothing have come up to him and either shook his hand or thanked him randomly for no reason. This is just a taste of his fame that he doesn't even know about yet. yet. And frankly, the Dursleys don't know he is famous either, so they're just as weirded out about these encounters as Harry is. The next change in the scenes is in regards to the letters. Dudley never gets to see the letter like he does in the movie, and it's actually quite clear that this is the first time his parents are being firm with him. He whines about wanting to see the letter and demands it from them, and his parents kick them both out of the room as they discuss what to do with the letter. Harry listens through the door and hears Vernon say that they swore not to, quote, have one in their house, meaning a wizard. It is also one of the first foreshadowing moments of Petunia's relationship with the wizarding world. As we will learn much later in the series, Petunia was jealous of her sister Lily and really wanted to be involved in the wizarding world, but in this moment we get the feeling that it is really Vernon who is strongly against it. Petunia has made a promise to Dumbledore, and seems to be okay with allowing Harry to go, but goes along with her husband's demands. Another change is that Harry actually gets upgraded out of the cupboard under the stairs to Dudley's second room, much to Dudley's dismay. This is because the first letter was addressed to Harry in the cupboard under the stairs. In Vernon's genius brain, he believes that moving Harry out of the cupboard to the upper room will throw Hogwarts off the scent. The second letter that comes is then addressed to the, quote, smallest room in the house. After not receiving the second letter either, Harry plans to sneak outside and intercept the mailman before the post arrives at the house, but as he creeps downstairs, he steps on Mr. Dursley's face as Vernon had slept in front of the door in a sleeping bag. Another time, a batch of letters comes inside 24 eggs delivered by the milkman. Finally, Vernon decides to take drastic measures and they pack up and leave. He drives down the highway and takes random turns as if throwing people off the trail. And it is actually in this moment that Dudley says, "Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he?" We then miss a stop they make at a random hotel during their impromptu road trip. This is a funny moment in the story as while they're eating, the hotel manager comes to them with a letter and says that he's got about 100 more of them at the front desk. Finally, they leave the hotel and head out to the random house in the middle of the sea that Vernon got from a random guy for a good deal. And it includes them having to take a small rowboat out to the island. This really shows how crazy Mr. Dursley has gone about this, as everything they've done so far on this road trip is anything but normal, which is way outside of the box for the Dursleys. Lastly, as Harry counts down the minutes until his birthday, he does not draw a cake in the dirt as they show in the movie, but the second that Dudley's watch strikes midnight, a loud bang is heard at the door and the chapter ends. These are all moments that don't really affect the overall plot of the Harry Potter series in a major way, but they all add up to one major point, which is world building. As I mentioned quite a bit in last week's episode, the changes typically involved removing an element of the story. Whether it was Mrs. Fig or Dudley's friend or Harry switching rooms, it seems like the movie cut some corners at the expense of making the world feel a little more fleshed out and real. So far, we aren't to the nitty-gritty of the story of Harry Potter, and as many fans know, it doesn't really start until The Prisoner of Azkaban and especially The Goblet of Fire. But trust me, in the coming weeks as we get into the chapters and scenes about Hogwarts, you will be blown away at how much has changed or simply missing from the movies. So out of the changes we talked about today, which ones do you think the film was right for making? And which ones do you wish they wouldn't have touched? Let me know in the comments below. As always, like and subscribe, and if this is your first time watching, be sure to go check out episode 1 of this series. Plus, make sure to sign up for your free trial of Audible today using my link in the description, as next week we'll be starting on chapter 4 of the Philosopher's Stone. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.